Hi everyone, I'm Miss Elle. Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be pulling apart VCE style exam questions for business management to help ensure you can get full marks for every style of question. Let's get started.
Before we can look at a full exam style question, we must first master our task words. Task words are the terms that tell you what to do in each question. I'm just quickly going to run through each of the most commonly used task words in business management. If you saw my previous video on unpacking VCE study designs, you'll notice that these task words have come directly from the key skills section. I've arranged these alphabetically for some consistency, and each term does have a distinctive requirement. Therefore, it is vital that you know what each needs you to do. As shown here, if you're asked to analyse something, more often than not, this means you need to provide the advantages and disadvantages of that strategy. However, when this isn't possible, which can happen with more complicated theory later in the year, instead you just explore both sides of an issue. When applying something, you need to make links between a case study and a piece of theory, and to compare two strategies requires you to explain what's similar and different about them. A discuss question requires you to explain the advantages and disadvantages of a strategy, and to distinguish between two things requires you to explain what's different about them. A side point here is that you must include a distinguishing word in your response. So for example, dogs bark, whereas cats meow. When you're asked to evaluate something, settle in for the long haul, as these questions require you to explain the advantages and disadvantages of your topic, but also include your own opinion with a final conclusion that links back to the case study. Examine requires the same from you as an evaluate question, but the good news is that an identify is quick and easy. You don't even need to put your response in a complete sentence. Generally, you'll be asked to identify a type of strategy, so all you have to do is give its name. Illustrate requires an example to support your answer, and select requires you to make a choice. Coming back to those terms I've skipped through, many students make the mistake of starting every question by defining the key terms. However, not every task word requires you to do this, which means you're just wasting your writing time. Only 5 of these task words actually require a definition. Naturally, define requires you to explain the meaning of a term. Describe, while similar to define, actually requires you to add some extra detail, and these questions are, generally speaking, worth more marks than just a define would be. Explain requires you to embed a definition into your response. Justify is a very commonly used task word, and it always has a hidden mark for defining the key term. Lastly, when outlining something, you essentially are providing a brief description of a term. Now we've mastered our task words, we can break down some exam-style questions. For this, we need to identify the 4 components of each question: the task word, the content terms, any limiting terms, and case study links. I've assigned a colour to each of these to help us keep track in this video. While it's definitely not practical to use a 4-colour approach in a SAC or an exam, it can be good practice during your homework, particularly if you're struggling to get full marks on your responses. I've just selected a couple of questions here relating to a case study on Medibank, a health insurance company. In business management, you really never know what type of business you're going to encounter in a SAC or an exam, so it's important to practice with industries outside of your comfort zone. Question 1 asks for you to identify the type of business Medibank has adopted. Discuss the features of this type of business. Step 1 requires you to find your task words. In this instance, identify and discuss. As there are 2 terms, we actually have a double-barreled question. There are 2 things we need to complete in order to earn full marks. Step 2, locate the content terms. Type of business tells us that we're going to be using theory from Unit 3, Area of Study 1, dot point 1. Step 3, the limiting term, is relatively hidden in this question. It simply states the, implying you must only discuss one type of business. Step 4, of course, requires your response to link back to the case study, in this case, Medibank. When structuring a response, I strongly recommend signposting your answer to clearly mark where you've addressed each part of the question. Don't be afraid to start a new line. If you run out of room on a SAC or an exam, there's always extra space at the back, or you can just request an additional paper. In this answer here, it states the type of business in the opening sentence. The 2 remaining sections clearly state an advantage and use the term however to indicate where the disadvantages are located within the response. Linking terms like additionally and furthermore are used to signpost the inclusion of a second advantage and disadvantage. Finally, the case study is addressed throughout, but you should avoid just simply using the Medibank name, as this doesn't actually illustrate your ability to link theory to the case study. But referencing that their competitors such as Bupa could be a greater threat, now that shows a more tangible link to the case study than the name alone could hope to achieve. Now to question 2. For 4 marks, distinguish between 2 different types of objectives at Medibank. Our task work distinguish here is coupled with the content term objectives, indicating we'll be using theory from Unit 3, Area of Study 1, dot point 2. The limiting term, the number 2, provides a count of how many objectives must be used and then linked to Medibank. The opening sentence clearly lays the groundwork for the rest of the answer by stating the 2 objectives that were used for the response. To earn 4 marks, the answer must include 2 sets of differences. The first one essentially uses the definition of each objective, of course using a whereas in between, but the second difference focuses on how market share is an external measure and profit is an internal measure. Throughout the response, Medibank is referenced, as is the health insurance industry. However, this isn't enough to solidify the link to case study. When linking case studies to business objectives, it's important to put an example of that objective for the business. You can totally make these up, just be sure they're realistic and that you always start your sentence with the magic word, could.
So that has been my take on breaking down VCE style exam questions. If you've got any questions, just leave them below and make sure to hit that subscribe button. I really look forward to supporting you through the rest of this year. Bye!